"Throw him out! We don't take strays dragging filth in their mouths." The voice cracked like a whip through the morning silence of Oakville Animal Rescue. Barbara had just opened the front gate, coffee still untouched in her hand, when she saw it. An old mutt standing at the steps, soaked from the storm, muzzle trembling, and in his mouth, something tiny, gray, and barely breathing. She dropped the cup. The crash brought Caleb rushing from the kennels. He looked past Barbara and froze. The dog, a wiry-haired terrier mix with eyes too tired for his frame, stood firm, despite the water dripping from his coat and the cuts that streaked his hind legs. But it was the kitten, limp, lifeless, soaked, that made Caleb sprint forward. "Easy, buddy," he murmured, crouching low. "You made it. Let me help." The dog didn't growl. He didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if presenting the tiny bundle like an offering. It was only when Caleb extended both arms that the dog gently released the kitten into his palms, then immediately collapsed beside her, too weak to stand anymore. Barbara, still standing frozen with a hand on her chest, whispered, "Where did he come from?" They rushed both animals inside. The kitten was ice cold, barely clinging to life, her breath raspy, her ribs poking through thin fur. Caleb wrapped her in warm towels while Dr. Renee, who had been prepping for surgeries in the back, abandoned everything and took over. Meanwhile, Barbara hovered, disbelief turning into something else. Guilt, maybe, or awe. The dog was given fluids and laid on a heated mat, but his eyes never left the towel bundle. Every time the kitten gave a weak mewl, his ears twitched, his body trying to rise, until exhaustion pinned him back down. And still, no one knew his name. No tags, no microchip, just a broken frame and a mission he clearly wasn't willing to fail. It wasn't until Caleb checked the external security footage that the real story unraveled. He called everyone into the break room and hit play. The screen showed rain falling hard around 4:43 a.m. A flickering street lamp lit the far end of the road. Out of the shadows came movement, a blur at first, then clearer. A dog, limping, blood streaking behind him, and in his mouth, something curled against his teeth. He stopped twice to rest. Each time, he set the kitten down, licked her gently, and looked around before picking her back up. Then he crossed the road, nearly hit by a delivery truck, and made it to the shelter gates. When the automatic sensor didn't trigger the doors, he paced, circled, then sat, waiting for almost an hour. No barking, no whining, just waiting. At the end of the video, the sky began to turn pale, and headlights washed over the parking lot as Barbara's car pulled in. The dog stood for the last time, walked to the front steps, and placed the kitten gently at the threshold. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Renee was the first to speak. He carried her the entire way, like she was his own, or like she was his last chance to save something, Caleb added softly. They named the dog Otis. The kitten became Clover, and from that moment, something in the shelter changed. Otis didn't leave Clover's side. Every feeding, every injection, every moment of pain, he was there, pressing his body close, letting her tiny claws knead his fur like a blanket. Clover, once barely clinging to life, began to heal faster than anyone expected. The vets called it a miracle, but Barbara knew better. It wasn't medicine, it was love. Still, the question haunted them. Where had Otis come from? What happened to him and this kitten before they appeared at the shelter? Who abandons a baby like that? And why did Otis risk his life to bring her here? And as Clover's condition improved and Otis began to stand longer, eat more, even wag his tail faintly when Caleb entered the room, another question took root. Would their story end here, or was it just beginning? Clover's heartbeat was still fragile. Her tiny chest rose and fell in shallow motions as Dr. Renee placed a stethoscope against her fur, frowning. The burn marks across her back were fresh, raw, and unmistakable. Someone hadn't just neglected her. Someone had tried to get rid of her, on purpose. Otis remained beside her, refusing to eat unless Caleb was there. He wouldn't sleep unless Clover was within his line of sight. The shelter had seen countless rescues, but never a bond like this. Otis, wounded, starved, and limping, seemed to exist solely for that kitten. On the third morning, Clover finally opened her eyes fully. There was no fear in them, only confusion, and then peace, as she weakly nudged herself into Otis's fur. The old dog licked her ears like he'd done it 1,000 times before. No one could explain it, but everyone could feel it. Otis wasn't just her rescuer. He was her protector, her family. But it wasn't until Renee reviewed Clover's injuries in detail that the midpoint twist hit like a punch to the chest. "These aren't just from fire," she told Caleb grimly. "The burns, they're chemical. Acid, maybe. Deliberate." Caleb's jaw clenched. "You're saying someone tortured her." "I'm saying someone meant to kill her," Renee said. And they almost did. The shelter's mood shifted. It wasn't just about recovery now. It was about justice. Barbara contacted local animal control while Caleb dove deeper into the footage, pulling cameras from the street leading up to the shelter. He was determined to trace Otis's path back, inch by inch, and what he found chilled him. Roughly 5 blocks away, at 3:48 a.m., a different camera picked up Otis staggering through an alley. Moments earlier, headlights had passed. A sedan. A passenger opened the door and tossed something small and limp, Clover, onto the ground like trash. Otis wasn't in the car. He came running seconds later from behind a dumpster, wild with panic. He sniffed the kitten, then looked around in frantic circles. And then he picked her up, just like that, as if he knew no one else would help. Caleb paused the video. He saw it happen. Renee leaned over. He followed them. He chased that car, Caleb muttered, until it lost him. And then he carried her all the way here. News of the discovery spread. Soon, local media got involved. A dog risking his life to save a tortured kitten? It wasn't just touching. It was extraordinary. Reporters asked for interviews. Photos of Otis and Clover curled up together under blankets went viral. Donations poured in. Offers to adopt Otis and Clover tripled within a day. But Caleb wasn't interested in the attention. He only cared about Otis's behavior. "He's not just bonded to her," he said during one of the staff meetings. "He's scared to lose her." "Trauma," Renee nodded. "He might have lost a litter once, or maybe he was bred and discarded. But that kitten, he chose her." Caleb stayed late that night, sitting by their shared pen. Otis's ears perked when he entered, tail thumping faintly. Clover was asleep, one paw resting against the dog's chin. "I don't know what they did to you," Caleb whispered, "but you made sure she lived. That counts for something." The next morning, Barbara came in early and found something astonishing. Otis, who could barely walk the week before, was standing. Not just standing, but gently nudging Clover with his nose, encouraging her to toddle toward the water bowl. When she mewed in confusion, he stepped beside her and lowered his head, touching hers. "She's learning to walk again because of him," Barbara said, stunned. "He's showing her how." But just as things began to look brighter, a shadow returned. That afternoon, a man arrived at the front desk, demanding to see a dog that stole something from him. Caleb stepped forward. "What do you mean?" The man had a nervous tic, shifting his weight constantly, eyes darting to the cameras. "The mutt. Otis, he's mine. And that kitten? She's not supposed to be here." Renee walked into the room and froze. Caleb recognized something in her expression instantly. She had seen him before. His face matched the blurred image from the street cam footage. The man who'd tossed the kitten from the car. Caleb's voice dropped to ice. "She nearly died." The man didn't respond. "You burned her," Renee added, stepping forward. "And you abandoned him." Still no answer. Just a smug look. "You're not taking them," Caleb said. The man gave a crooked grin. "They're just animals." But by then, animal control had already been called. The footage, the injuries, Otis's arrival, it was all documented. Police arrived minutes later and took him into custody. As they placed him in cuffs, Clover let out the tiniest cry from the pen in the back. Otis stood, growled low in his throat, and placed himself between her and the door. He hadn't forgotten. Neither had anyone else. The man was gone, but the chill he left behind lingered in the shelter like smoke. Caleb stood by the front door, long after the squad car disappeared around the corner, fists clenched so tightly that his nails left crescent marks in his palms. Barbara silently placed a hand on his shoulder. "They're safe now," she said gently, "because of him." But Otis didn't feel safe. Not really. That night, as the rain pattered against the windows and wind whistled through the old beams of the shelter's roof, he whimpered in his sleep. Low, restless noises that made Clover twitch in her nest of blankets. Caleb, watching from the adjacent cot he'd dragged into the room, didn't sleep either. Instead, he lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering what it must have been like for Otis to carry that kitten across town, hungry, wounded, limping, and still driven by something bigger than fear. By sunrise, Clover was stronger. Her movements were no longer jerky. Her eyes followed Otis with focus now, not confusion, and more astonishingly, she'd begun to mimic him. When Otis drank water, she would stumble toward the bowl and sniff it. When Otis padded toward the door to go outside, Clover would mewl softly, waiting to be lifted and carried. It was as if she'd decided he was her mother, and Otis, for all his injuries, embraced the role without question. Then came the twist. Dr. Renee called Caleb into her office holding a printout, her face unreadable. "We got the advanced blood. Panel back," she said. "On Clover." Caleb leaned forward. "Is she okay?" Renee hesitated, then nodded slowly. "She is, but it's not what we thought." Clover hadn't just suffered from chemical burns. According to the lab results, her blood contained high levels of sedatives, likely used to paralyze her before she was dumped. "That man didn't just abuse her," Renee said. "He drugged her first. She was supposed to die slowly, silently." Caleb's stomach twisted. She wouldn't have made a sound. That's why he didn't bother hiding her. Renee looked down at the paper. But she didn't die, because Otis found her. They stared at each other for a long moment. In that silence was something unspoken, a growing sense that this was no ordinary case, not just a rescue, but fate intertwining two shattered souls who somehow found each other in a world that tried to erase them. The shelter released a statement with the blood test findings. Within hours, their story exploded again. National outlets picked it up. Animal rights activists offered rewards for more information. A local news anchor called Clover the little flame that refused to go out. But Otis, he became something more. A symbol. Videos of him shielding Clover in his sleep were edited into montages with piano music. Artists drew illustrations of them curled together under stars. A filmmaker emailed asking to make a short documentary. Still, Caleb remained cautious. "Fame doesn't mean they're safe," he told Barbara. "Not until someone truly gives them a home." Dozens of families applied to adopt them, most with good intentions, but none passed Caleb's quiet test. He would sit across from each family, asking about how they'd managed trauma, or if they'd be okay with Otis waking up growling from nightmares. Too often, the answers were vague. "Oh, he'll get over it," one person had said with a laugh. That application hit the trash instantly. Then one day, a letter arrived. Handwritten, no email, no phone number, just a return address and a short note from a retired fireman named Joseph Harlan. The writing was shaky but full of sincerity. "I don't need a pet. I need a purpose. I lost my son in a house fire 2 years ago. Been quiet ever since. I've got land, a fenced orchard, a warm fireplace. If those two need a place to belong, my heart's got space left." Caleb folded the letter 3 times, stared at it for a while, and then looked at Otis. The dog met his eyes without blinking, as if waiting for him to make a choice. That weekend, they drove out to Harlan's home. The place was simple, worn down in a charming way, just like Otis. There was no big welcome, no fuss. Harlan stood on his porch, coat zipped, hands in his pockets, eyes damp the moment he saw them. "You brought them," he said softly, voice cracking. "I didn't think you would." Clover peeked from Caleb's jacket, blinking sleepily. Otis, already sniffing the breeze, moved cautiously toward Harlan, until the old man knelt, opened his arms and whispered, "It's okay. You're safe." And Otis walked right into him. Winter came early that year. The wind carved through the hills like it had teeth, and Joseph Harlan's orchard, once golden with fallen apples, now stood bare beneath a slate-colored sky. Inside the cabin, warmth flickered from a wood-burning stove, and Otis lay curled on the rug in front of it. Clover nestled under his chest, like a secret he was still guarding. Caleb hadn't meant to visit again. He told himself his job at the shelter was done, that Otis and Clover had found their place, that Harlan, quiet, steady, impossibly kind, was the right man to carry their healing forward. But something unsettled him that week. He kept dreaming of the man who'd hurt Clover. In the dreams, the man wasn't arrested. He was watching, waiting. Caleb would wake up sweating. The image of Clover's frail body burned into his mind. So when Barbara mentioned they'd gotten a brown envelope at the shelter addressed in jagged handwriting, no return address, postmarked from the same county Harlan lived in, Caleb didn't hesitate. He drove out the next morning. Harlan greeted him with a tired smile, bundled in a thick flannel jacket. "Didn't expect company," he said, though he stepped aside and let Caleb in without a second thought. The cabin was modest but full of soul. Family photos on the mantel, a pair of old boots by the door, and in the corner a small crate converted into Clover's sleeping nook lined with flannel. But something felt off. Clover wasn't her usual self. She trembled as she walked, stumbling twice before collapsing beside Otis. Her eyes looked glassy, and there was a faint wheeze to her breath. Otis wouldn't leave her side, not even when Harlan offered him his favorite jerky. Caleb crouched beside her, heart thudding. "She wasn't like this last week." "I know," Harlan said softly. "I've been watching her closely, eating less, sleeping more. I was going to call you if it got worse." They rushed Clover to Dr. Renee. The drive felt longer this time, and Otis wouldn't stay in the back seat. He climbed over the gear shift and lay across Clover's frail body like he was afraid the motion would shake her apart. When they arrived, Renee cleared her schedule without hesitation. Tests were run, scans taken, blood drawn. The diagnosis punched the room breathless. It wasn't just the past. It was something current. Clover's tiny body had been exposed to a rare toxin, slow-acting, designed to stay dormant in small doses. Dr. Renee, brows furrowed, tapped the test results and said, "This wasn't left over from before. Someone's been poisoning her." "Again," Caleb's voice cracked. "But she hasn't left the property." "No," Renee agreed, "which means the toxin came to her." Back at the cabin, the mood turned electric. Harlan double-checked every item in the pantry. He combed through the bag of donated food from the shelter. That's when he found it, a sealed pouch, branded like the others, but with one corner that felt crusted. Otis sniffed it once and growled. Caleb opened it carefully and handed it over to Renee for testing. Later that night, her call confirmed the worst. The pouch contained traces of the same toxin in Clover's blood. Someone had tampered with the donation. Someone knew where she was, and they weren't finished. That night, Harlan didn't sleep. Neither did Caleb. Otis paced the front window while Clover curled against the base of the couch, whimpering softly. Every shadow outside felt like a threat. Every creak of the floorboard felt like a footstep. Then, just after midnight, Otis lunged toward the door and barked, a sound so loud and primal that both men jumped. They followed him outside. The wind was sharp, moonlight silver across the yard. And there, on the wooden porch railing, sat another envelope. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of Clover the day she'd been found, crumpled and bleeding near that rusted dumpster. Someone had taken it from a distance. The message scribbled across the top read, "I know where she sleeps." Caleb's blood turned to ice. They contacted the police. A detective was assigned. Security cameras were installed. But even with all that, fear hung over the cabin like smoke. Otis refused to leave Clover for a second. He stopped eating, stopped drinking unless she did too. He simply lay there, chest to chest, heartbeat to heartbeat, like he could scare death away by holding her tighter. But death didn't come. Instead, something remarkable happened. Clover's breathing steadied, her eyes cleared, her appetite returned, slowly but surely. And through it all, Otis stayed locked to her side, refusing to rest until she could stand on her own. When she finally did, wobbly but defiant, Harlan let out a sob and sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Caleb stepped outside, needing air. He looked out at the orchard, bare branches swaying against the night, and realized something strange. No matter how cruel the world had been to them, Otis and Clover didn't carry bitterness. They carried only each other. That was their answer to all the darkness, to love harder. And maybe that's why the story was far from over, because what Otis had done was more than save a kitten. He'd taught everyone watching what true healing looked like. The snow had come early and heavy that week, blanketing the quiet forest roads around Joseph Harlan's orchard in a silence that felt almost sacred. Inside the cabin, the fire cracked softly in the hearth, casting long golden shadows across the walls. Otis, the German shepherd who had once braved hell to carry a broken kitten in his mouth across town, now lay with that same kitten curled against his chest. But Clover was no longer the frail, dying thing they had first met. Her body, once trembling from trauma and poisoned breath, now rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Her fur had grown back in soft tufts. Her eyes were alert and wise, older than they should have been. Joseph sat in the corner, notebook in hand. He'd been writing more lately. Not stories, not fiction, just truths. The kind that feel too quiet to say out loud but too important to keep locked away. Truths like how he'd once thought he was too broken to help anything broken. And truths like how Otis and Clover had made him believe in mercy again. Caleb arrived just before sunset, shaking off snow from his shoulders. He didn't knock anymore. "I brought something," he said, holding up a small USB drive between two fingers. "Footage from the shelter's old security system. We thought it was all erased." Turns out the old maintenance guy backed some of it up. Joseph raised an eyebrow. "Footage of what?" Caleb handed over the drive. "The night Otis brought Clover in. They plugged it into the TV. The screen blinked, flickered, then settled into grainy night vision footage from the shelter's back lot. A cold wind had tossed debris across the ground. In the corner, a shape appeared, low to the ground, limping slightly, something dangling from his mouth. Otis. The dog's eyes reflected in the infrared glow as he pushed his way through a gap in the fence, ducking under a collapsing wooden gate. He hesitated once, looking behind him, then padded forward. In his mouth was Clover, tiny, limp, ears matted. Carefully, he set her down beneath the spotlight and nudged her gently with his nose. She didn't stir. For a second, Otis did nothing. Then he sat beside her and tilted his head toward the building. He didn't bark. He didn't howl. He just waited. Minutes passed. Then the back door opened. A shelter staffer stepped outside, clearly confused. The moment she spotted the pair, she called out for help. The footage blurred with motion as more people rushed in. But Otis didn't move. Not until Clover was gently lifted into a towel-lined basket and rushed inside. On the couch in Harlan's cabin, Clover raised her head as if she knew what they were watching. Otis thumped his tail once. Joseph wiped at his eyes without a word, and Caleb whispered he knew exactly where to go. The story of Otis and Clover spread further than any of them could have imagined. Caleb had submitted the footage and a written piece to a national animal rescue network. Within days, the story went viral. People weren't just watching, they were weeping. Donations flooded the shelter. Rescue centers from across the country called to share their own tales of animals saving animals. One child even mailed in a letter with hand-drawn pictures of Otis and Clover, ending it with, "Thank you for showing me what real love looks like." But the true healing happened far from screens and headlines. It happened in the quiet walks Joseph began taking with both of them. Clover perched in Otis's old sidecar, bundled in blankets, ears flapping in the breeze. It happened when Joseph finally let himself visit his wife's grave again, placing a photo of the three of them beside her stone, whispering, "They'd have made you smile." And it happened each time Otis lay beside Clover during her checkups, refusing to blink while the vet inspected her, just in case something wasn't right. Clover never fully regained the use of one hind leg, but she could climb stairs now, jump into Joseph's lap, and play tug-of-war with Otis on the porch. Her meow had a trill to it, like a giggle in cat form, and Otis, despite his age, seemed renewed, brighter, more alert, as if saving her had rewired something inside him. But perhaps the greatest moment came the morning Joseph opened the front door and found another package waiting. Not a threat this time, but a wooden box with no name. Inside it was a letter. Short, one sentence. "Some souls are sent to save others. Yours already have." Beneath it, tucked into a small velvet pouch, was a medal, the kind awarded to military dogs. But it wasn't issued by any official department. Instead, it had one word engraved across the center: family. Joseph didn't know who had sent it. Maybe someone in the network. Maybe someone who had once needed saving and had found it. In the most unexpected story of a dog, a kitten, and an orchard cabin far from the noise of the world, he placed the medal on the mantel, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even in a world fractured by cruelty, abandonment, and silence, love still finds a way to rise. Sometimes on four legs, sometimes tucked beneath the chest of a creature who refused to give up, and sometimes it begins with one decision: to carry someone smaller, softer, and more broken than yourself, all the way to safety. Otis hadn't just brought Clover to the shelter. He'd carried hope, and in doing so, he'd restored it in everyone who watched. The cabin grew quiet again. The snow deepened outside. But inside, wrapped in warmth and flickering light, the family, once impossible, now undeniable, slept in peace, together,